please note that this episode contains personal reflections on body dysmorphia, disordered eating, and postpartum struggles. While we approach these topics with care and compassion, we recognize that they may be sensitive or triggering for some listeners. If you're currently in recovery or navigating a difficult season, please take care while listening. And remember, you can pause, skip, or come back to this when you're ready. Hey there, and welcome back to the Nourisher podcast. You are listening to another episode in our Recomposed series. This is where we're taking a closer look at how women are healing their relationships with their bodies piece by piece and on their own terms. In today's episode, I'm sitting down with Kate Olson, a mom, a friend, and someone who's opening up publicly for the very first time about her lifelong struggle with body dysmorphia, the mental toll of postpartum changes, and how choosing to let others in really helped her begin to heal. This conversation is honest in all of the best ways, and if you've ever felt ashamed of how you see yourself or afraid to say the hard things out loud, I want you to know you are so not alone. This is a safe space. We're here for you, and I cannot wait for you to hear this conversation. Hi, Kate. Welcome to the Nourisher podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing so good. I love the power of this community and just connection in general because you and I don't actually know each other. And you were recommended to me from another podcast guest. So I just really love that we were able to connect and that you're willing to share your story with the rest of us.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on here. I guess we're about to get to know each other pretty well, but I'm excited to be able to share. And I mean, I'm a little bit nervous. The topics that we're covering are kind of ones that you don't talk about just in a surface level conversation. So I'm excited to share a little bit about that today. And I'm thankful that you gave me the opportunity.
Tell us a little bit about you, kind of your background. What are you doing for work or your hobbies? And then we'll kind of get into what led you to this conversation.
Yeah, so I don't know that I have an actual job right now, not one that pays anyway. I'm a mom. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I do help my husband some with his business. I do some book work and things like that to kind of help things flow better, and then I chase our boys around. I used to own a fitness studio and business, and a couple years ago let all of that go and sold that to another woman in our community, and she does a great job with that. But as a family, we felt like it was time for me to step into different roles and just have a closer connection and more flexibility with our kids really was the main thing. And so right now I'm staying home.
That's definitely a full-time job.
Definitely is.
So you're 100% working, maybe harder than the rest of us.
I don't know about that. Some days I put in more work than others, but yeah, we have 3 boys, and we've lived here in Plainview most of our life. We're Plainview natives, and we escaped to Lubbock for college, and then we ended up back here.
I'm from Vega, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so it's so odd how going to Texas Tech was extremely overwhelming for me.
Yes. Where are all these people coming from?
Exactly. And Lubbock is not that big, but it was just a huge culture shock. The size of Amarillo is comforting because I can walk into a restaurant and know everyone, but I could also walk into a different restaurant and know absolutely no one.
Lubbock definitely felt very large. I graduated with a class of 7. So whenever I walked into my first chemistry lecture and there were 300 plus people in there, there was a little bit of culture shock for sure.
I didn't think anyone could beat my size of class. I graduated with 19, but 7?
7. I had 7.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is crazy. Well, yep. A small town girl's got to stick together.
That's right.
So what led you to this conversation? I know I mentioned earlier that you were recommended to me by a former podcast guest and friend. And so just a little background on that. I have struggled with some body dysmorphia my entire life, still going through it. And I really wanted to speak about it, but I love to hear from different perspectives. Really, I made a call out to the listeners and the followers of the podcast and just asked if they knew anyone who would be willing to come on and speak about it. And then that's how I was pointed to you. And so I was just curious, what led you to take a chance and tell your story maybe for the first time out loud?
Honestly, it's been an ongoing thing that I've talked to a couple close friends about for a couple years now, and that I felt like it was time for me to share parts of my story as far as, eating disorders and the dysmorphia and what that looked like in my life. And I just never felt released to really just make it a public thing. I didn't want it to just be like a social media thing, or I wanted to make sure that I was sharing it for the right reasons, and that whenever an opportunity came up for me to do that, I wanted to know that that's where the Lord really was leading me to do that and to feel that push. And honestly, sharing about this is pretty intimidating, and there are a lot of moving parts to it. And so I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just forcing something when it wasn't time. I had a hard time for the longest time thinking like there is no way that that part of my story is something that needs to be shared because it's painful, it's hurtful, it's something that you kind of want to just keep to yourself because you might be embarrassed or different things. And so leading up to talking today, there were a lot of prayers and just prepare my heart, kind of thing for the right time. And so I remember having a conversation with a friend about it and just saying, I don't really know exactly how I'm going to share it, but I do feel like it's time. And not even a couple weeks after that, you sent me that message and I was like, oh my goodness. So I just felt like I needed to let that be my yes and just be vulnerable in a way that I didn't, as far as our human flesh and desire to be comfortable. I knew that that was my push to like, maybe it's time to have the uncomfortable conversations. And if it helps even just one person, then it's worth it.
Gosh, I love that. And it's so weird how those things happen. I mean, obviously, it's just like divine timing. I'm so happy that you are comfortable. I know, well, I say comfortable, you're very nervous. But I'm just so grateful that you chose this platform and this opportunity to share all of these parts of your story. And I know that so many women and so many of us are struggling with these things silently. And sometimes it takes just hearing a complete stranger talk about it to know that we're not alone and that our struggles are not necessarily like unique in a sense.
Right. I know we all have our own stories, and a lot of times whenever it's something like this, it does feel like, oh, there's no way that somebody else has this mindset or that they're struggling with this and feel like they can't talk about it. But that, just like you said, the older I've gotten and the more that I've been vulnerable with the right people, which is a huge part, like be vulnerable with the right people that you can trust with that. And that's hard to find those people. But the more that I've let parts of that go, the shame falls away from the situation. You're like, oh, okay, so they've been through this in their own way too. And, just building that community that supports you and pushes you to heal instead of like having people that tell the story in the wrong way or that kind of abuse your honesty. It's really nice to have that support and accountability, really, of people that push you to heal and be your best self. So
You mentioned, as we get older, we learn who to have these conversations with and how to have these conversations in a way that heals us. So I know all of these problems, unfortunately, start for us as women at a very, very early age. So can you kind of take us back to what your relationship with your body was like, maybe in your teenage years?
it definitely started early. I could even say that maybe before that, I was just very body conscious, very aware. I feel like there were many conversations that were had about diets or shape or, just different ways of, I guess, taking care of your body that I was like, oh, I need to, look this way. And a lot of that even was, I mean, yes, it learned and you hear that, but it was something that I really put on myself of like, oh, I need to look a certain way. So it really started more of like the vanity thing, going into my teenage years, which is awkward for anyone, like your body's changing and you're trying to just kind of step into your own, like, who am I? And all of the changes can be really tough. I do feel like my parents were good to, talk about what my body was going through and what to expect and things like that. But as far as my mindset and watching my body change, I had a hard time with it because I'm like, well, I mean, I know you're supposed to grow, but now my clothes don't fit. And I was very tomboy. I wanted to wear like the big baggy shirts and shorts and all that, and to kind of hide everything because it is awkward when your body changes. But I feel like my relationship with my body was very I was very honed in on the physical image. And I remember even going to like our yearly physical exams. I can remember certain years and what I weighed, and that was very important to me. And did I tell anybody else that? No, but I cared a lot about that. That just became a lot of what I put on myself as far as like who I am. I let that be a lot of who I was and dictate a lot about my life and what was important to me in those years.
I remember some of the girls that I went to school with, they were all very, very thin. Some of
Hmm.
them were just like came out of the womb with six packs and
Right.
had
Yeah.
no body fat. I, got my breasts when I was in like fourth grade. I started my period early. So lots of hormonal changes. And then I was just curvier. Like I've always been curvier than the girls that I was surrounded with. They didn't put that pressure on me to look like them, but I felt an internal pressure to question, why do I not look like this? We're the same age, we're in the same sports, we're doing the same workouts every day, and I don't look like that.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Growing up, there were people that would make the comments of like, "Oh, you just have like the body of a little gymnast," and they meant it well. They meant that as a compliment. Looking back at that now, I'm like, I wish I would have accepted that as a compliment. But watching Olympics or whatever and seeing gymnasts build, I'm like, yes, I am 5'2" and I am curvy and bigger and very muscular. And I just thought, ugh, I don't, I feel like our identity is attacked very early on. And, compliments that were meant well from people can get twisted into, ooh, like you take that on as a negative thing when it wasn't meant to be that way. And I definitely went to school with a lot of girls who, even going through puberty, their bodies didn't really change, same as what you were saying. And I just thought, man, I would love to be like that. And growing up and kind of maturing a little bit, I can't say that I always appreciate that about me, but I've learned to appreciate it more. But that was definitely a struggle being an athlete and all of that, and like, how come I'm in the size XYZ or whatever. And then just realizing that isn't as important as we make it, but it was a big deal to everyone then.
I definitely don't ever want to blame specific people for the things that they said to me, whenever I was growing up, because a lot of that is my teenage brain just twisting and turning and my own insecurities, right? It's the same principle behind asking married women when they're going to start having babies, right? Like,
Right.
until you go through something yourself, you don't realize how it sounds or how maybe annoying it is to ask those questions.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I heard the same things. I heard comments like, "Oh, they're not so and so's size, but they're more like your size," and that wasn't an insult. It was just something that fueled my negative thoughts about my own body. So I completely understand, and that kind of leads into those perceptions, right? I think in the time that we grew up in like the early 2000s, it was like Kate Moss, Nicole Richie, Paris Hilton, like Friends, like, I mean, those women in Friends are so teeny tiny.
Mhm.
And Jennifer Aniston is like the picture of perfection. Of course, media, I think, has a lot to do with it. But do you feel like there were other influences that kind of influenced the way you thought about your own body?
Yes, I mean, you can listen now, and there are women that are even older, and they still talk about themselves in a way of like, oh, I need to go on a diet, or like it becomes such a huge part of how they exist. And I've not really ever heard many people say, like, I just need to take care of my body. I need to take care of the gift of what I have, and it's always of like, I need to shrink. I need to shrink, and I heard that a lot growing up, whether it was family or friends or people at school or whatever. That was such a huge priority to women, especially growing up. And I do feel like a lot of that was put on us by social media and things like that. And social media has blown up so much since then. The social meaning of image is so different than what it really is. Like we make our image about what people think of us, or how thin I am, what size clothes I wear, how I see myself. And a lot of times, like, if we're not careful, we just get really wrapped up in like our reflection, and we get in our own heads and form these ideas around like who we are and what we are, and it's based off of performance in a certain light. But like you said earlier, like, I don't want to blame anybody for that, but there were just a lot of different factors. Like, I was an athlete. I was very hard on myself. I wanted to make sure that I was always doing my best, and then it kind of just depended on what subject you were talking about. But I didn't really give myself much grace at all in any of those. Like you said earlier, in that time you saw people who were super thin, and I think that idea of what my outer image was supposed to look like definitely was fed off of things like that, for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned, hearing older women refer to their own bodies and how that kind of encourages us to also feel the same way about ourselves. I've always told myself that if I were to have children, like, I want to talk about my body in a way where it's like, I need to take care of my body. I never want to look at a plate, finish my burger because I want to, and then go, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have eaten all that.
Right.
And so I think we really need to move forward in life thinking about how we talk about ourselves in front of other people
Hmm.
because of the influence that it has on their own perception of themselves.
Right. I don't remember who it was, but I do remember reading something years ago, and I feel like it was maybe on Instagram or something, but it was somebody writing about how they don't just comment on people's bodies anymore, because that can just create this idea in our minds, men or women, doesn't matter, especially women though, because I do feel like we are geared more towards thinking about those things so much. But how, instead of letting a lot of the conversation be about like, oh, you've lost weight, you look so great, like, talk about characteristics that they have. Like, what are some things that they do? Like, who are they outside of what they look like, because we all have a soul. We all have so much more to us than our outer shell, and we need to let people know that they're important for something other than how they look.
Yes, absolutely. We get these ideas in our head from a very early age, and especially moving into our teenagers, like we've talked about. But I know it almost gets worse, or I think it depends on the person, right? For me, I felt like my body image issues almost got worse as I transitioned into like early adulthood. So I'm curious to hear how that went for you. Like, how did your relationship with your body evolve as you entered like early adulthood?
Yeah, no, I can agree with that. I feel like whenever I moved out, and your whole life you're like, can't wait to be an adult, and then you get out and you're like, oh, this actually comes with a lot of responsibility. But I feel like as an adult, living outside of the house and forming different relationships outside of school, I do feel like my relationship with my body did get worse because, for me, as far as the eating disorder part, it was definitely a pride thing of like, I'm not telling people this because it's embarrassing. And so living outside of your home and not having people that know you as well, know your tendencies and your habits and things like that to kind of call you out and be like, hey, you doing all right? And so for me, I feel like it got worse because I was able to kind of just shove those things down more, and I just thought, no, I'll get better. I'll get better. I can do this. And then it was like this toxic cycle that I created with myself of like, no, I'm going to get better, but also I'm not going to tell anybody because it's embarrassing. And so I just kept all of this to myself, and the relationship with my body and the habits all got much worse than they were before that.
Yeah, I remember going into college and then of course, I was drinking a little more than I should have. But going into college and then, one, I have no money to eat actual food.
Right.
Yeah,
That's so true.
I'm eating Taco Bell value menu,
Mhm.
like
Right.
all the things, but not knowing how to balance and then going from a life of crazy workouts and athletics. I'm basically working out all day, every day, to now I have this freedom, right? But I don't know how to balance these things. It drove me absolutely insane. And so I remember taking hydroxycut at one
Mhm.
point because I was just like, I've got to do something. Something is not, this isn't working. In my dorm, there was a community bathroom, so I didn't feel comfortable resorting to bulimia as I had before, because I didn't have that privacy, but I would go long periods of time without eating or only eat certain things. And so it's very hard to navigate that when you are alone, I mean, like you don't have parents watching you. Your friends are worried about their own school and their own social life, so they're not watching you. And so I think it can get really dangerous. And I know I struggled with that. So I can only imagine how many young women are dealing with it even now.
Right. So I do remember, now that you bring that up, it's funny that it's not funny, but the things that you remember whenever, you were talking about hydroxycut and things like that. And as I was going through all of this and just trying to figure out how to get better, I realized that I abused so many things like that. Thinking that that would be what would make me happy with my body or whatever. And it's very dangerous because my husband and I worked out a lot. We were actually just engaged at this point, but we worked out in the mornings at the rec center together, and then we'd go to class, and we both took supplements and things like that. He was very smart about the way he did that. He was very disciplined. He didn't like take extra aminos just because, or and he was taking a thermogenic instead of caffeine. He went and bought one for his body mass, and he ended up not liking it, and so I started taking it on top of my own and pre-workout and all these things. And I started, like, my heart would race and I was having all these side effects. And I remember one morning he opened up our supplement cabinet and he goes, have you been taking these? And I was kind of embarrassed to say yes. So I was like, yes. And he said, oh my goodness, that's really dangerous, which, like, we don't take those anymore because they aren't good for you. But at that time he was like, oh my goodness, like, no wonder you're feeling so horrible. And I would do stuff like that, and knowing that I was going over what I should be doing, but I was thinking like, well, I mean, I've got to lose weight. And to put my body in harm's way like that and to have the mindset of like, well, if I lose weight, it's worth it, was bizarre. And, a lot of it was like trying to be in control of all those things, but my actions and tendency were so out of control,
It's crazy the amount of supplements and things that are out there and just readily
Mhm.
available for us to purchase.
Yes. I know.
Yeah, and just not having the education on what some of these ingredients can do to your body and what they're meant to do. I hope that gets better. And I hope that, when someone, if they hear something that we've said today and they go, hey, I've been doing this and I don't exactly know why it's wrong, I would love for them to reach out to, obviously a health professional would be the best, but for them to, feel comfortable enough to talk to someone and say, I've tried this and I heard that you did that as well. And what did that do to you? Just because I think it would really help people not even take that risk in the first place.
Right. Like I said earlier, I think a lot of it just goes back to trying to heal and shift your mindset to, okay, I need to take care of my body. And just because something is available out there and that you can take it doesn't mean that it's good for you to take. And, I doing that on top of, I binged and purged a lot. And so all of those things together were really dangerous. And I don't think I understood the weight of what I was doing then, but I was also in a mindset at the time that I don't know that I would have cared, what the side effects could have been. And so looking back now, it breaks my heart to know that I did get to that point that I didn't care, and I hope that if anybody does get anything out of hearing that, I hope that they hear that there is hope, and that, just because that's where they are right now doesn't mean that they're going to stay there, and that their body is worth so much more than abusing it that way.
You mentioned earlier that you are a mom, and I know something for me that because I don't currently have children, but because I struggle so much with body dysmorphia and have had eating disorders in the past, like one thing I've talked to my therapist about before is being deathly afraid of how my body would change should I ever have children. And so I wanted to ask you what it was like for you to navigate pregnancy and how your body was just rapidly changing, and maybe how your mindset shifted or was all over the place during that time.
Yeah, so I always knew that I wanted to have children, and there definitely was a lot of fear around that. We did not plan our pregnancies, and so I think it probably worked out best that way. For that reason, I knew that my body would change and that it would bother me, but I knew it was for a greater purpose than myself. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't still affect you, So like with our first, I remember finding out I was pregnant with him, and I immediately was like Googling how to not gain too much weight. I remember that being like one of the first questions that I asked my OB when I went to my appointment, was like, so what's a healthy amount of weight? Which obviously, there is a way that you do need to take care of your body, but the fact that I was most worried about that was like, my body did change quickly, I am sure. And so I showed quickly. And I remember caring a whole lot more about that with our first than I did any of them, because I didn't know what to expect after I gave birth. Like, what is my body going to do? How is it going to respond? And you have people that are like, well, your body never goes back to how it was before. And then you also have people that are like, well, it can be better. And like we talked about earlier, some of those comments are meant well, but I took those and ran with them of like, well, I'll show you I can be better after I give birth. And so I ended up having to have a C-section with our first, and I was, swollen from all of that. And so you have more restrictions after surgery and things like that. But I remember a lot of my worry being like, well, I've got to get back in the gym. I've got to get back. And so even before I was released, I was sitting there like sitting down in a chair, standing back up, sitting down, standing up, like trying to get my exercise in like that, and not in a safe way, like not, I wasn't released. And for that to be what was in the forefront of my mind at the time, I'm like, I wish I could go back and redo that, because there's something so special and wonderful about having a baby and getting that time to bond with your newborn and things like that. And I know I can't go back and change what my mindset was about at that time, but I did learn from that in the way of like, I can trust myself to make good decisions and take care of my body. And maybe I don't look the same way I did before kids. Maybe it is better, but maybe I can just appreciate the fact that I did get the privilege of having babies. And, what's been really cool is out of their mouths, they rarely talk about, like, we don't make a big deal about people's body shape and things like that in our house. I just think it's really important for them to, even if I don't believe it when I'm saying it, like for them to hear me say that my body is good. I can care for my body the way that it is, or, we can take care of our body. We do need to move our body. And in a way like that, they have taught me so much as a mom. And I kind of jumped forward. I don't know if I even answered your question correctly, but the main thing that I learned through pregnancy and after was that I can trust myself to make good decisions for my body, and that doesn't have to be the most important thing about me.
Something you said that you had went in and asked your doctor, like hands down, how do I not gain too much weight? And I think it is scary. It's so scary to think about. Your body's going to change when you have a baby, right? Like, I want to have children, right? But I also am like, if I looked like this for the rest of my life, like, I would totally be cool with that too.
Yeah.
And so, but it is odd because I think it's a point of tension for women, because we do have we put so much pressure on what we look like, but we also know we want to be a mother and we want to have children.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is just, I feel like, adds a whole other layer of pressure that we put on ourselves. I've seen several videos of women lately who their newborn, might be in their rocker and they're working out in their home gym, and then they break down crying because they feel guilty. Like they shouldn't be doing that. They should be spending time holding their newborn. But then we're wrestling with this idea of I've got to get back to normal.
I feel like people have kind of started to do a better job of not just putting so much pressure on moms to just, bounce back, or however you want to phrase that. I've seen people say, go spend 20 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour if you need, and I know that it varies for different people depending on how much support they have and things like that. But I feel like as a society, there still is a lot of pressure for women to, bounce back and all of that. But I do feel like there's also more support for new moms or moms at all to take care of yourself, because that is important, to be mentally well. And, kind of going back through the pregnancy process, I did struggle with my changing body. And it was so odd because even during pregnancy did struggle some with bulimia and of course dysmorphia and things like that. But it was so crazy how, I look back at pictures or videos and I remember loving being pregnant. It was such an odd, like so many different feelings all at once, I guess. But I had a hard time with my changing body, but I also loved it. I loved feeling my babies move and just watching my body change like that. It really was a very neat experience. And honestly, I would do it again. I was telling my husband that the other day. I said, I really do miss being pregnant. And I think a lot of that now is that I don't think I'd fear the changes as much. And I think for me personally, I'm not saying it's like this for everybody, but for me personally, I think it took me seeing my body change in so many different wonderful ways for me to like look back and appreciate that a lot more now, because in the moment I was fearful of all of that. I was fearful that I wouldn't get my body back. And I'm thankful that, for my own selfish sake, I guess, not planning that was probably best for me, because I do feel like I had so much fear surrounding my body changing that it was good for me to, you know, have those surprises. But I think a lot of that also goes back to what we were talking about earlier with our image, and what we're basing our image off of. And, we're all fearfully and wonderfully made, and I raised hearing that all the time. And I think a lot of what I thought that meant was that, well, then that means that I need to look good all the time. I need to look the part. And I was putting so much emphasis on the physical aspect of all of that, that that's all I could think of. And seeing now that what our image is reflecting his nature and his character, and it's not to be perfect, and that having that image doesn't mean being perfect. A lot of us have this idea in our head that we don't have room to screw up, and have that flexibility with what we look like, or how we perform.
I really love that you're giving us a different perspective on how your relationship with your body changed for the better after pregnancy. But I know it had to have taken you some time to get to this point. So immediately after, whether you struggle with postpartum depression or not, I think, again, as women, we're all going to go through that cycle of, this is what my body looks like now. This is who I am. This is what it did. I brought life, into this world. But how did postpartum and your body dysmorphia kind of coincide there immediately after your firstborn? Were there ways that maybe the two blurred together or made healing more difficult in that moment?
So during postpartum, I do feel like the dysmorphia was a lot. It was definitely something I struggled with on a consistent basis. And I think a lot of what fed all of that, looking back, were odd habits that I had created. Like, whenever your phone will tell you that you have low storage. So I'd go back and try to like clear stuff. I've come across so many pictures I would take of myself like multiple times a day of my body at that time. So I documented pretty much everything every day from different angles. And I just created this like, okay, once you get to a certain place, you'll be fine. And I put a lot of pressure on myself to bounce back for sure. And I do feel like mentally that made it harder for me to be present as a mom. And I don't feel like I would go as far to say that I had postpartum depression, but I definitely had that longing to have my body back. And so breastfeeding and things like that were things that were very stressful to me at that time, because I was more concerned about my body and the shape of it, and how to get back to the body that I had before. And I definitely struggled with binging and purging a lot at that time. I was still in college with our first. I went back to college 3 weeks after we had our first son. And so I think there were just a lot of different directions that there was a lot of stress coming in. A way that I coped with stress for a long time was my eating disorder, because that's something that I felt that I could control. The extra stress of, postpartum and school and all of that, I do feel like I struggled most heavily after our firstborn.
As young as you were having your first, I think that makes it even harder to get out of that mindset. But I'm curious as to what you did, if there was any moment for you where your mindset kind of shifted to where you are now, being more appreciative, or how did you put in the work, or is there something that you told yourself or did for yourself that started to change that mindset and get you towards healing?
Honestly, I think a lot of it was just taking the steps to, like we talked about kind of in the beginning, was finding your people. that you can be vulnerable with. And my husband has definitely been one of those people for me for a long time. I told him for the first time that I was struggling with that before we got married. And, I was fully expecting him to be like, oh, goodness, I'm not committing to this, and he didn't do that. He said, well, let's find the help that you need. And whether he's giving advice or a listening ear, sometimes you just need to say things without someone lecturing you, and he's, he was that first person for me that I could do that with. And he knows how my mind works. And there's still days that are tough. And I just, if I need him to just listen, I'm like, hey, can I just tell you this? I'm having a hard time with this. I also have a couple close friends. One in particular, about 2 years ago, she's actually our pastor's wife, and she had some health questions for me. And so our relationship kind of started that way. And we formed a friendship, through all of that. And I just remember one day, as a big step for me, I told her, because I just thought I do need accountability. And sometimes, I'd feel guilty just venting to my husband all the time. Not that he made me feel guilty for that by any means, but I just thought, I do need to be more honest about where I'm mentally at with all of this. And she just, we sat across each other at the lunch table, and she was like, I'm here for you, and there wasn't like this guilt of like, oh, I can't believe you're still struggling with this. It was just, I don't know, it felt like a lot of weight came off of my shoulders and my heart, just knowing that I did have that accountability and friendship. A lot of the fear of, well, they're not going to want to be my friend if I share this. There are just so many things that come with that struggle that do promote fear and like, I'm never going to get better. You've either trusted the wrong person before, or you've never trusted anybody, or you've just never surrendered that. And I do remember that being a big part of moving forward with everything. I know everybody's journey looks different, but just knowing that I wasn't alone, even if their struggles were different than mine, I had that safe place. I had that community. And, whenever you do feel like you're backed into a corner, you're kind of an easier target for the enemy to be like, hey, you're going to be stuck here forever. And so just having that community that encouraged me, but was also honest with me in times where maybe I needed to hear the hard things too, has been really helpful for me personally.
Yeah. And I mean, just like we're using the podcast, to open up and be more vulnerable, I think I completely relate to your story of when you finally open up to people about the things that you're struggling with, and how that is ultimately the first step in healing, or at least working towards a more positive mindset. I mean, it's just like therapy, right? I mean, but your friends are free.
Right, right.
So your friends and your spouse, and even if you feel like you don't have anyone else, I think therapy can also be a really good way as well. Unfortunately, not everyone has that support system in those groups of people. But yeah, I definitely think there's so much to be said for opening up and just having the conversation, and with someone that is not going to judge you for the decisions you've made, or the things that you've done, or the way that you think about yourself. I know I've had conversations with people where I say, this is what I think about myself, and it's almost, I don't think they mean to shame you, but
Yeah.
they're like,
Why?
yeah, why you're, and
Yeah.
almost like, I know you could probably relate, because I know, you're religious. And so when people also say, this is what the Bible says, and this is why you shouldn't think that way, I'm like, okay, well, yes.
But I am thinking that.
Right. But I am, and I'm human in that. And this is why I'm coming to you, because I need your help. So yeah, I really love that that's part of your healing journey, is just the fact that you kind of took that first step to open up to someone and tell them about what you're going through.
Right. Well, and going off of the therapy part, I definitely tried that out in the early stages of everything. And so I would just encourage whoever is going through this, like whenever they are choosing who they're going to go to, like if it doesn't, if you don't mesh, don't feel like you have to stay at that one, because I was in the mindset at that time where I was desperate, but I don't know that I was necessarily ready to truly face everything. But I also, like, we were broke college students, and so we chose what we could afford, and I only went a couple times. It was a pretty horrible experience. A lot of it was based around like my weight. Like I'd get weighed whenever I would show up, but she'd make me do that backwards. And, we talked a lot about my weight and like how often I was getting sick. And she'd be like, "Oh, that's good. That's why you lost weight." And I was like, I don't think this is what I need. If you get into situation like that, I would just encourage you, like, yeah, maybe like don't be afraid to say this isn't working. I need to explore different options. Had I kept going, I think it would have been more of a hindrance than a good thing. Um, and then, later on, a couple years ago, about a year and a half ago, I went to a counselor, and it was a wonderful experience. So, there are definitely great options out there for counseling or therapy or whatever you're needing, for sure.
My therapist is like, again, she's my paid best friend, my paid bestie. But yeah, she's helped me through a lot of things. But definitely, I started going for body dysmorphia, and it was one of the best things that I could possibly do for myself. Not to say that I'm not still struggling, but just you got to have somebody else to bounce these things off of, for sure.
Right. Totally agree.
So I feel like you've given us a lot of really good pieces of advice and things that have kind of helped you. But I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, what does it mean to choose to love a body that has been through so much, whether that be eating disorders, pregnancy, postpartum? Like, what does that mean to choose to love your body through all of that to you?
For me, at this point right now, and of course this will change over time. It'll look different, it could be different in a week, it could be different in a year, but for right now, choosing to love a body that's been through so much just means, acknowledging my imperfections, but not letting them own me. But also, not giving so much power to shame, because a lot of times whenever we look at the way that we've either treated our body, or it's not perfect, or whatever that can look like, we can just shame ourselves into a corner or into a mindset of like, I don't even know how I can love this body. And my body has been through a lot. I have abused it a lot. It was hard for me to put this one into words, because I'm like, what do I do to love my body? And choosing to love my body right now has been different than all of the other seasons that I've been in. I used to teach a lot of fitness classes, and I used to work out all the time, and it wasn't to love my body. It was basically out of punishment, because I wasn't where I wanted to be. And so it was this cycle that I created that a lot of people do because they want to just take care of their body and be healthy. But my mindset around all of that was like, no, I'm doing this because I can't stand the way that I look right now. And so, in this season, after stepping away from teaching for other people, I'm choosing to love my body by like, okay, so what does my body really need right now? And actually listening to that, there have been days, and my mentality around all of that for the longest time was like, oh, I didn't do this super tough workout today, so I didn't do anything. I didn't earn this food. I didn't earn XYZ, um, But over the summer, having more time to really evaluate what my habits were and why I was choosing to exercise or why I was choosing to eat the salad. Did I really want that? I don't know. For the longest time, that was for lunch because that's all that I needed or all I deserved, really. And having the boys home this summer, a lot of days, by the end of the day, maybe I hadn't worked out. Did I play baseball with him? Mm-hmm. Did I go on a bike ride? Yes, that's moving my body. And so choosing to love my body means like, hey, give yourself some grace, because just because you didn't do the super tough workout doesn't mean that you didn't do a wonderful job at other things today, you know?
I think grace is so important to just
Mm-hmm.
all around for the people around you, but especially for ourselves and within our relationships with ourselves and other people, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I would also encourage people when they're trying to start giving themselves grace, like it doesn't feel natural to do that. And so it does take time. It's not something that you try one time and you're an expert at it. It takes time, and there are days that I don't extend grace to myself at all. But, once you try to start creating that habit and, balance, discipline, and grace and all of those things, you do things for different reasons.
Absolutely. Bonnie Kate, I really appreciate you opening up with us and sharing your personal story. It means a lot to me, and I know I've told you this several times, and this has been a long time coming. In our initial conversation where we touched base and just talked about, the point of the podcast and kind of where we wanted to take this conversation, I just felt chills almost like when we were talking, just because it was such an important topic and something that you hadn't opened up about in the past. I just am so grateful for you and your story and the perspective that you're bringing to our listeners.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And like I said earlier, I hope that if anything, it gives somebody, the hope to keep moving forward and just know that they do have support and they are loved and they are worth it.
Okay, I always close the podcast with 2 questions for my guests. And so the first question is, what is one thing that most people may not know about you?
This is like those icebreakers. When people ask, I was like, I really did have to think about this one, and it's not really anything like super interesting. But small talk is so painful for me. I have such a hard time going to functions where there are a lot of people I don't know, and the small talk questions. I'm so awkward with all of that. I just really desire the deep connection, but you have to have small talk to get there.
Oh gosh, I completely agree. I don't know if it's like as you get older, you just have less patience for small talk because I do a lot of networking events and I'm like, okay, I don't really care about any of this stuff. Like, you know what I mean? I feel like I trauma dump on people so I can relate to them faster
I
so that
know.
so we can
Oh,
actually have a
yeah.
conversation about life.
Yes. Well, and I can always appreciate whenever someone starts doing that too. And I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah. So I can. And then later I'm like, oh, I shared way too much. They think I'm nuts.
We're the same person. And listen, I don't know how or why people keep giving me a microphone, but I will end up having to like MC an event or talk at an event, and then here I am just sprinkling in little trauma dumps. But what's funny about that is people will come up to me afterwards and they're like, "You're my people." So
Isn't that so funny? So it's funny you say that, because there have been a few like women's events and stuff that in between different activities, they're like, okay, Bonnie Kate, like you'll go up there and you'll say something. I'm like, and I've said at a couple of the events into the microphone, I'm like, I don't know why they keep giving me this microphone, but here I am.
I think you're probably a lot more outgoing than you think you are because number one, you're willing to like actually speak into the microphone, but being open and kind of vulnerable in a funny way, I mean, that's our superpower, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'll go home and tell my husband, I'm like, oh my goodness, I told a horrible joke. Like it was so corny. And he's like, you said that? I'm like, I said that. It was awful.
No, you're not
But
alone. You're not
yeah.
alone.
Hmm.
Okay, so my second question is, who are three women who inspire you?
So this one was hard because I do have a lot of women in my life that I do admire for a lot of different reasons. This one in particular, I felt like I wanted to try to answer it in a way that kind of pertained to what we talked about today. And so my first one is Regina Gonzalez. She's my friend that I confided in about everything a couple years ago. And she's just been a really good source of, information. And she's prayed for me so many countless times and will, send me things. And I just appreciate her willingness to listen without there had been times before that I had shared in a church setting, and it was like kind of like you mentioned earlier, like well, you shouldn't think that, and she didn't do that. And so just having that openness and feeling like I can tell people in that setting, I just appreciate that quality in her to see people and love on them regardless. Then my second one is Robin. She's one of my friends and she has 3 kids too. And I just really appreciate the way that if there's ever anything that comes up in her kids' life that she may not know the answer to, or that might need a little extra attention, or whatever it may be, she is always willing to put the work in to research and do her homework to either find the best school they need or whatever it might be. She is always researching how to be the best mom that she can be to her kids, and she is really wise about the way that she shares all of that. And then the third one is Andrea. She actually owns a boutique here in Plainview. And I love a lot about her, but the things that really stand out a lot to me are like she will not give up. Like she is constantly fighting to improve on something, and but she doesn't take herself like way too seriously, so she has fun while she does it. And she just she brings a lot of joy to life, and she tries really hard to encourage people and have a positive attitude through struggles. She's also honest about what she struggles with, and so she just has a good head on her shoulders and is good at balancing like being fun but also responsible and just growing a lot. So I admire her for that.
I love that all three of them had to do with what we were talking about today. And it also goes to show that there is so much value in being a good listener and a good friend. This is also such a special moment when we get to talk about women in our lives, because when they hopefully listen to the podcast and they hear their name at the very end, it's just like they're going to feel so special. And I love that for you, and I love that for them.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you asking that question. Like I said, I do have, of course, like my mom and people like that, and I was like, oh, I don't want to leave people out, but at the same time, I wanted it to kind of be relatable to what we were talking about today. So I'm thankful for those people in my life.
I love it. Well, Bonnie Kate, thank you so much again. I know that people are going to get so much out of this conversation, and you're wonderful, and I am just so happy we got to connect.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much for being here and for holding space for this conversation with Bonnie Kate. If her story resonated with you, we'd love for you to share this episode with a friend or leave a quick review. It helps so much more than you know. And don't forget, new episodes of the Nourisher podcast drop every other week. You can also sign up for our newsletter at thenourisherpod.com so you never miss a moment of connection, courage, or growth. Until next time, stay strong, stay connected, and keep growing. This episode is not intended to serve as medical or mental health advice, and it should not replace the care or guidance of a licensed professional. If you're struggling, please reach out to a trusted provider. You deserve support that's safe, qualified, and centered on your well-being.